online. And on that note, I must apologise that at our last meeting, we had technical issues, partly, I gather, to do with the YouTube channel that we use. So on this occasion, we have two sets of backup, and indeed we're recording the session, so it will definitely be available when we finished online if the live streaming for any reason goes wrong. But apologies that that's what happened at our last meeting. Can I begin by asking people to introduce themselves just quickly around the table, because there are people who've not been with us before. I'm Mike Thorne, I'm the chair of the South Essex Integrated Care Board.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Tom Abel, I'm Chief Exec of the Integrated Care Board.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charles Thorpe, I'm Executive Chief Nursing Officer of the Integrated Care Board.
Afternoon, I'm Matt Sweetin, I'm the Executive Medical Director of the ICB.
Hello everybody, I'm Claire Hankey, I'm the Director of Communications and Partnerships for the ICB.
Good afternoon, Jo Cripps, Exec Director of System Recovery.
Dan Dorsey, I'm the Alliance Director for Mid Essex, which is Malden, Braintree and Chelmsford.
It's very loud down here. Yeah, well, thank you for that. Is there anything we can do technically? Are those speakers? Are these speakers actually working? Is it better now? Okay.
Hello, I'm Paul Scott. I'm the Mental Health Member. Is that loud enough? And Chief Executive of Essex Partnership.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Anna Daly, I'm the Primary Care Board member.
And I'm Anna Bokobza, Director of Strategy at Essex Partnership, and today shadowing Paul Scott.
Good afternoon, I'm Lucy Whiteman. I'm Chief Exec of Provide Health and one of the Provide members.
Hello, Matthew Hopkins, the Chief Executive of Mid and South Essex Foundation Trust and the acute provider member of the board.
Hello everyone, I'm Helen Garvey, I'm the Essex Neuro Rehab Lead.
Hello, Emma Richardson, Director of Commissioning at Southend City Council.
Hello, I'm Sarah Buckle, Director for Wellbeing, Public Health and Communities.
Good afternoon, I'm Rob Percy, I'm the Exec Director for Adults and Health at Thurrock Borough Council.
Hello everyone, Jeffrey Olsen, Associate Non-Executive Member on the ICB Board.
Good afternoon everyone, Joe Fielder, I'm a Non-Executive Member on the ICB.
Good afternoon, Samantha Goldberg, and Performance and Planning Director for the ICB.
Pam Green, Exec Director for Primary Care and Alliance Director for Basil and Brentwood.
Afternoon all, Becky Jarvis, Alliance Director, South East Essex.
Good afternoon, I'm Kate Butcher, I'm the Deputy Alliance Director for Mid Essex.
Hi, I'm Emily Huff, I'm Exec Director of Strategy for the ICB.
Good afternoon, Jen Keaton, I'm the Chief Finance Officer for the ICB.
Thank you very much. And we need to remember to use the microphones, otherwise it won't get through the live stream. This is very unworldly, hearing a voice echoing away. So our first item on the agenda is the Community Hospital Services Decision-Making Business Case. This is a decision which has been on a long road to come here. We benefited early on from a number of interactions in person and online in all sorts of ways with quite a large number of people in the Malden community, and we're very grateful indeed for that. We then established what I call the working group. It had a proper title, but I'll call it the working group. And this turned out to be a very good way of understanding what the issues were around the decisions which are to be made this afternoon. And again, we're very grateful for everyone who participated in that, and particularly to James Holden, who was the independent chair of that working group. And I have to say, from that set of experiences, I think we all feel around this table that we've learned a lot about how, when we need to consult with people and come to decisions about change, how we can do it most effectively. So we've been on a learning journey, and we've learned from those interactions. So thank you to anyone who was involved in that. It's much appreciated, and it has helped us. This afternoon, we've got a set of decisions. We're going to have a presentation about the decision-making business case, which is NHS jargon for the next stage we have to go through. And then I'll ask somebody to summarise what happens after this, because it goes to a higher making decision power body after it leaves us. But there shouldn't be any changes. It will be either, yes, I guess you've got it right, or you haven't, or we need more information, and so on. But I think the documentation that is here is required from us. There's an awful lot of it. And again, I apologise for the length of what is there, but in a sense it shows the amount of work that's gone in. And I would like to thank all of those involved in drafting the documentation, because it is a very clear set of documentation and much appreciated, the work that's gone into it. Essentially what is here, I believe firmly, and I've read it all very carefully, embodies the outcome of the working group. So what is before us today is all the necessary technical background that we're required to submit that would support moving in the direction of that outcome from the working group. So there should, in point of fact, for those who've been on that journey, be no surprises in what is here, but we have to provide this level of detail in order that a final decision can be come to with the right authorities. So with that as background, I think, Tom, I'm initially going to pass over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So as you've set out, the purpose of today's session and the decision that we're going to make is looking at 3 decisions around community services here in Mid and South Essex. So those being the future location and configuration of community intermediate care beds and stroke rehabilitation beds in Mid and South Essex, the future location of freestanding midwifery-led birthing services in Mid and South Essex, and the future of ambulatory care services provided at St Peter's Hospital in Malden. And clearly this, as you set out, Mike, has been the culmination of a significant journey for us all and for our communities. And the decision that we need to make today, we need to be assured meets our statutory responsibilities that we'll talk a bit more about as we move through, improves outcomes for local residents, and maintains public confidence. The decision we want to make is we want to make sure shapes safe, high quality and sustainable community services for the future. So just a quick reminder of our aims in terms of what we need to do as an organisation and as a system. So first, we need to make sure that the decisions that we make offer the best outcomes to individuals who we serve. Secondly, that we deliver health and care services that are as effective and as efficient as possible and offer choice and improved personalised care wherever possible. And thirdly, we need to demonstrate that we're delivering value to the health and care of our economy and our community. So those are 3 important things to bear in mind as we walk through the decision-making process this afternoon. So we've been on an extensive journey, which predates me, in fact. Back in October 2023, there was a number of changes made to community beds here in Mid and South Essex to make sure that they ran as effectively as possible and to protect patient safety during that winter of 2023-24 and beyond. The rationale behind those changes were that we needed more community stroke capacity for the winter, and there were ongoing concerns with the estate at St Peter's Hospital and the impact that could have on inpatient services. Those included issues around the lift at St Peter's Hospital, where community beds were situated, and there had been a number of issues about it frequently breaking down, and the risk that associated with that, that people with limited mobility may not be able to evacuate in the event of a fire or another emergency if needed, which created a safety risk. As part of those changes and part of those risks, the number of inpatient beds had already been reduced to 16. As a result of that, obviously that limited the number of patients and visitors who could access and use that service. A further issue was that during heavy rain, the main building was prone to flooding, and there were risks associated with that, clearly. As part of the wider changes, so the 16 stroke beds at St Peter's Hospital were closed in Malden, and 25 beds were opened at Berwick Community Hospital. We also converted 6 intermediate care beds at Cumberledge Intermediate Care Centre in Rochford to accommodate the stroke rehabilitation patients, which increased the number of stroke beds at KIC from 8 to 14 and reduced the number of intermediate care beds from 14 to 8. That overall increased the number of available beds from 129 to 138 and increased the number of stroke rehabilitation beds, whilst slightly reducing the number of intermediate care beds. So that obviously kind of was a significant process, and following that we moved into a consultation process on formalising the future shape of those services for the future, and so we can make a permanent set of decisions to make sure that we had safe and sustainable services. So this board will have seen the pre-consultation business case that was approved by NHS England, and we've obviously undertaken public consultation that was held during January 2024 to April 2024. In August, the independent review of that consultation and the feedback that we received was published, at which point, based on that feedback, we took a decision to pause the decision-making process in September, and we set up the Community Consultation Working Group to review the proposed changes and to review some of the areas of concern that were identified as part of that feedback that we received between January and April. We, as a board, obviously have considered that report from the Community Consultation Working Group, and that fed into a process by which we scored and reviewed the potential options, and we use that scoring on the basis of to make recommendations. And as we kind of set out within the DMBC, that scoring process was undertaken from a clinical, financial and operational perspective with experts from within our system as part of that. And we also undertook appropriate assessments, including equality and health inequality impact assessments and quality impact assessments of the proposed changes. Following that, we then went through an assurance process with NHS England and external clinical reviews. And so this has gone through a number of steps to get us to today and to us making final decisions. I'm going to hand over to Kate now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the DMBC itself. And so over to you, Kate.
Thank you. So the ICB is the accountable commissioner responsible for commissioning all of the services that are under consideration within this business case. So the decision-making responsibility sits solely with the ICB. Having said that, the document, the work that's happened and the recommendations within the document were developed by the Mid and South Essex Integrated Care System as a whole. And the document has been shared with the boards of Mid and South Essex Foundation Trust and Mid and South Essex Community Collaborative, so they're informed and aware of the recommendations and in support of them. It's also been to NHS England regional team for final review, and they gave us some advice on additions to make before we developed the final version of the decision-making business case. And we've also sought legal advice throughout the process, and our legal team have also reviewed the document prior to it coming here today. As the slide says, the purpose of the decision-making business case is to enable the board to take an informed and evidence-based decision on the proposals on which it consulted. The DMBC is based on evidence that was compiled through the pre-consultation business case phase, feedback from the public consultation, the recommendations that came from the Community Consultation Working Group, which we'll cover in more detail later on in the slides, and other relevant information that was gathered since the publication of the PCBC and since consultation. The DMBC includes an overview of all the feedback that was received and our responses to that feedback, information about the proposed options and service changes, potential impacts on the service changes and those impacts on service users, and how we plan to mitigate some of those impacts through implementation. It also includes the recommendations for each of the proposals for consideration, and it includes a section on how we'll implement the changes. Next slide, please. So if we just run through the proposals that we consulted on. So Tom's already talked through the rationale for the moves on community stroke and intermediate care rehabilitation beds. There was a clinical capacity task force that was responsible for overseeing the development of the options. We started off with a very long list that was then whittled down to option A and option B, which we then went on to consult on. In option A, there are 50 stroke rehabilitation beds at Brentwood Community Hospital, meaning that we'd have a 50-bedded specialist stroke unit there. This would mean that KIC would provide only intermediate care beds and not stroke rehabilitation beds. The stroke rehabilitation beds at St Peter's Hospital would permanently close, and there would be intermediate care beds provided, as there currently are, at Mount Letham Court in Billericay, Thurrock Community Hospital, and Halstead Hospital. Option B proposed that we created 2 smaller specialist stroke units, 25 beds at Brentwood Community Hospital, 22 beds at Carmlidge Intermediate Care Centre in Rochford. Again, it would mean the stroke rehabilitation unit at St Peter's Hospital would permanently close. There'd be no IMC beds at KIC. And again, there'd be intermediate care beds at Brentwood Community Hospital, Mount Letham Court, Thurrock and Halstead Hospital. Next slide, please. The freestanding midwife-led birthing unit, so some of the concerns around the estate of St Peter's and the fact that moving other inpatient beds would leave that unit isolated as the only other 24/7 service on the St Peter's site meant that the Community Capacity Task Force took the decision to also look at the future location of the freestanding midwife-led birthing unit. One of the options would have been to remove that freestanding unit altogether. The group felt that we needed that still within Mid and South Essex, and it was important to continue to offer choice to patients around where they give birth. Sorry, no. Oh no, that was the right side. So we only consulted on one option here, and the rationale behind that was there was only really 2 options. One was St Peter's Hospital, and one would be the William Julian Coulthard unit at St Michael's Hospital in Braintree. Because of the concerns around the estate and the isolation of the unit at St Peter's Hospital, WJC was seen as the preferred option to go and consult on. It's also a more modern unit than St Peter's is, and part of the work that we've done has meant trying to best use the existing estate that we've already got in Mid and South Essex. Just noting that any outpatient appointments, so ante and postnatal appointments, would remain at St Peter's Hospital. Next slide, please. So the task force also took the decision to look at all other services being delivered within St Peter's Hospital, primarily because of the concerns raised around the estate. In the consultation, we asked for views on the future of services at St Peter's Hospital. We call them ambulatory care services, so they're outpatient and diagnostic services that take place there. Different types of consultation to avoid different types of decision. For this, it was a gateway consultation because it recognised it was a pivotal point in the process. And the first decision that we needed to make was, will we continue to provide ambulatory care services at St Peter's Hospital or not? The consultation didn't include any alternative locations. At the time of going out to consult, we were still reviewing locations, and we also wanted to give the public the opportunity to feedback on any ideas they had about where we could deliver services from or how we could deliver services differently. And then I'm passing over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Kate. I think you're doing the next slide. We're not doing. Oh, we've not got the strategy one. The consideration for proposals. We skip that one.
Okay. No, that's it. Sorry. The key factors taken into consideration when we considered the proposals, we've got 4 domains that we looked at: so strategy, quality, estate, and financial affordability. They have subdomains. Each of these subdomains has been looked at when we were coming up with the case for change, which is within the decision-making business case, and also when we went through the scoring and review process. So we look at demand and capacity. So it's important to ensure that we've got the capacity we need for now and for the future. We need services that are fit for the future. So do they meet patient needs, and will they meet patient needs in the future? Clinical case for change. So can we deliver high quality care in line with local and national guidance? Safe environment for care. Does the clinical environment allow for the delivery of safe and high quality care? Sustainable workforce, so it's important that we have the right workforce and we're able to retain and recruit staff. For estate, we need to use the best estate that we have available across Mid and South Essex and recognise that we do have issues with estate and with capital funding available for any new estate. And then financial affordability, so it's important to ensure that these services were affordable and give value for money for the integrated care system and for the public. Now over to you.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm just going to take the board through the consultation outcome, which we did report back to the board in July last year when we received the actual outcome report. But just to remind you that the response to consultation we had, it garnered significant public interest, as you can see from the slide and the detail there. We had over 5,500 responses to the consultation survey. More than 570 people participated in face-to-face events, with a further 400 people attending the session hosted by Sir John Whittingdale, the local MP in Malden. All of the feedback was independently analysed and an outcome report was published, first in draft and then for the board to consider, which it did so in July 2024 last year. Move to the next slide, please. So as we can see from this slide, there were 5 key overarching themes that emerged from the consultation feedback report, based around the areas of strategy and the strength for the case for change, the clinical models and patient pathways, workforce and staffing, estate and travel and access. The community beds, the number of people likely to be impacted by the proposal was relatively small, around 2,080 people, so 0.17% of the population in Mid and South Essex would require the use of those beds. In terms of patient transport services, transfer from the acute to hospital inpatient beds would be, patients there would be eligible for patient transport, so the concerns were more focused on relatives and those visiting those receiving care. And then in terms of community stroke rehabilitation bed, there was a clinical requirement that beds were concentrated to ensure that the expertise was concentrated. So having considered all of those, all of the feedback that came through the consultation, as Tom mentioned earlier, the decision was then made to pause the decision-making process to allow further engagement and the establishment of the community working group. If we go to the next slide, please. So the community working group was established in October 2024 and led by James Holden, as already said. The working group included representatives from the NHS, from Health Watch and from the Save Malden Medical Services campaign group, as well as local councillors from various different authorities across Mid and South Essex. The group reviewed the consultation outcomes and the proposals over 6 months and completed their recommendations in March 2025. The outcome forms part of the DMBC appendices. The outcome report can be seen as part of the pack. The working group's recommendation and the outcome report was presented to the board in May this year, and their findings utilised in the development of the final recommendations for decision are before the board today. And you can see on this slide that sets out the key recommendations that came from that report. In terms of St Peter's Malden, there was a recommendation around investment to keep the facility operational for the next 5 years, while capital funding was identified for a purpose-built new facility. For inpatient care, the recommendation was around the acknowledgement that the NHS could not efficiently operate an inpatient facility in Malden due to low utilisation. For stroke services, there was a recommendation around the preference for option B, and that was the split bed option that we consulted on, ensuring that Southend residents who require specialist stroke rehabilitation could remain locally and not and reduce their travel burden for visiting families. And then in terms of birthing services, there was a key recommendation about ensuring that we retain the pre and postnatal appointments that currently take place at St Peter's, with the standalone midwife-led birthing unit being permanently sited in Braintree. Next slide, thank you. So having kind of considered all of that and the work of the working group, for the board now, the opportunity is to review whether we've met our statutory duties and the tests that we need to undergo in terms of making a significant service change. We've undertaken extensive public involvement throughout this process. We had a robust consultation process that met the gunning principles, which is the case law that sits around formal consultation in the NHS setting. It's been to the clinical senate, there's been clinical reviews for safety and effectiveness. Financial sustainability test is met, it's revenue cost neutral to the organisation and the system. The NHS reconfiguration test and assurance has been passed. We've undertaken an integrated impact assessment and assessments against statutory duties and mitigations that need to be addressed. And obviously we're proposing ongoing oversight through a new community committee. I think I'm handing back to you now, Tom.
Yes, thank you. So I think what's important just to make sure that the board kind of reflects on is, as we go through these recommendations and make a decision on them, is to ask the questions. Will these recommendations deliver improved access and safety of care? Have we adequately met our duties as an organisation to engage, listen and act on public feedback? Are the risks which have been identified associated with these recommendations being appropriately mitigated? And is the implementation of these recommendations deliverable? And are the proposals fair, equitable and aligned with NHS strategic priorities? I'll hand over to Kate, who will walk through each of the recommendations which are set out within the DMBC.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to talk through the recommendations and then I'll go on to talk about the rationale for each of the recommendations. So the board is recommended to approve option B for community stroke and intermediate care beds. So that's having the split stroke units across Brentwood Community Hospital and KIC. That means there'll be 25 intermediate care beds at Brentwood Community Hospital also, but there will be no intermediate care beds at KIC. And then there'll be 66 other IMC beds across Mount Nessing Court, Thurrock Community Hospital and Housestead Community Hospital. And means that the stroke beds at St Peter's Hospital will permanently close. For the freestanding midwife-led birthing unit, the recommendation is that we permanently relocate that unit to William Julian Coulthard Birthing Centre in Braintree, and antenatal and postnatal outpatient appointments will remain at St Peter's Hospital in Malden. For ambulatory care services at St Peter's Hospital, the services will remain in St Peter's for up to 5 years while we work with partners to develop a long-term plan for a new local health hub replacement for St Peter's Hospital. That is subject to a number of caveats, which we will go through in the slides. So the rationale for the recommendation for community inpatient beds, we felt that they offer a safe and secure environment for care. They offer more choice and equity for stroke rehabilitation services across Mid and South Essex compared to option A. The capacity available meets the demand based on the demand modelling that was undertaken. There's less impact on the workforce as there's less upskilling and training required, and that's because the staff that currently work at Brentwood Community Hospital in the intermediate care ward would have needed to be upskilled to be able to deliver stroke care, whereas in this option they can continue to work in intermediate care. It fits the system estate strategy as we're making best use of the available estate across Mid and South Essex. There's less impact on staff and patients during mobilisation because it's more in line with the current arrangements that we have in place for community beds. It's affordable to the system. It was the preferred option from the consultation feedback, although recognition that the preference was neither option from the feedback. It's in line with the recommendations made by the Community Consultation Working Group. The integrated impact assessment did not favour one option or another. Both were felt to have mainly positive or neutral impacts on protected characteristics. Where there were negative impacts, we have outlined in the decision-making business case how we will mitigate against those. It is worth just noting here that when we went through the scoring and review process, option A did come out slightly higher than option B in terms of scoring when weighting was applied, and that was predominantly due to the financial impact. So we had more savings coming from option A than we did from option B. That meant when weighting was applied, option A scored very, very slightly higher than option B. However, we then had a discussion within the programme board that oversaw the decision making or the recommendations. And because the option B had scored higher on quality strategy and was the preferred option from the work that we've done with the Community Consultation Working Group, we felt that it was better to go with option B as the recommendation rather than option A. And there are also risks associated with recognising those savings identified. So that's the rationale, and more information about that is within the decision-making business case. The rationale for the recommendation for the freestanding midwife-led birthing unit, again, it's felt to offer a safe and secure environment for care. It's accessible for the maintenance of the population in Mid and South Essex, but recognising there is a negative impact on those that live in Malden. Based on current birthing rate, it offers sufficient capacity in the system. It's felt to be a better environment for care for the workforce delivering care. Again, it fits the system estate strategy for making best use of estate that we have available across the system. It's an affordable option for the system. The majority of respondents in the consultation didn't want the service to be relocated, and the majority of those that expressed that were from the Malden district, understandably. It is in line with the recommendations made by the Community Consultation Working Group. The integrated impact assessment, again, identified that for those with protected characteristics, the impacts were mainly positive or neutral. And again, where there was any negative impacts, we've looked at how we can mitigate against those. For ambulatory care services, there was recognition that St Peter's Hospital does have significant issues with the estate, and it isn't suitable for long-term care, as a care environment for the long term. The proposal is for the short to medium term, so that is up to 5 years. The services at St Peter's Hospital have all been moved to the ground floor to mitigate against the risks that Tom identified earlier with the lift and flooding on the first and second floors. There are several mitigations that are identified within the decision-making business case, and Tom's going to come on to talk about that in a little bit more detail, to ensure that services can remain at St Peter's and the site will be safe and be able to offer high quality care for patients. The site does offer good access for patients and parking. It means that we keep services local for residents living in and around Malden. It's beneficial to staff to keep the services where they are. However, we do need to recognise that poor estate may impact on staff morale. The revenue costs have been reduced because services have moved to the ground floor, and there's a lot of work that still needs to happen on ongoing capital costs to keep services on site for the short to medium term, and also to look at how we fund a long-term solution for replacement to St Peter's. A review of other potential sites and alternative locations was undertaken through this process, and they were also shared with the Community Consultation Working Group, but there were no other viable alternative sites identified that wouldn't require significant capital investment. And I'll pass back over to you, Tom, to talk a little bit more about the ambulatory care services.
Thanks, Kate. So, as Kate said, I think we all recognise the fact that the current site of St Peter's is high risk and therefore unsuitable for long-term clinical care, and therefore within the DMBC it sets out what are the steps that should be taken to optimise its use in the short term whilst we work through the longer term solution for health services within Malden. So those kind of steps which are set out within the DMBC include the need to make sure that there is a review of the areas of St Peter's which are currently being used to provide services from, and an agreement around the essential works that need to be required in order to improve the estate to allow services to continue to be delivered safely. Secondly, a recognition that that will require some level of capital expenditure in the near term, and a full report on the anticipated costs and a plan for how that capital will be found to support the work will be shared. That will be led by Matthew and the team at MSE Foundation Trust, with support from us obviously here at the ICB. Thirdly, that essential maintenance must be carried out routinely over the period that St Peter's is in use to make sure that services can continue to be delivered as safely as possible, and alongside that, a regular assessment of the estate to make sure it is safe and services can continue to operate effectively from the environment. Alongside that, there is a commitment, as set out within the DMBC, that a plan needs to be developed for a future modern health hub and/or replacement for St Peter's Hospital, for that to be developed and delivered over the next 5 years. And we are already turning our mind to that, given that that is something that is way overdue. And then finally, alongside this, within the DMBC, it sets out the proposal as kind of developed by the Community Consultation Working Group to create an ongoing community committee in Malden who can work alongside the NHS to keep an eye on and review the service delivery within Malden, and equally input into any changes that there may be around service delivery in Malden, and particularly on the St Peter's site over this period of time. I won't go in detail through the risks and mitigations because they are all set out within the DMBC, but I think what's important to say is we have undertaken an extensive process of looking at the risks that are identified, which partly led to the initiation of this consultation in the first instance, but we have gone through those in some detail in terms of those risks and those mitigations, both in terms of the estate issues and concerns, and equally in terms of any other service concerns or emergency preparedness issues or concerns. So, in terms of next steps following decision making, so this actually might get to the final stage. So when we do make this decision, it will be the final decision, given that we've gone through the kind of assurance process with NHS England prior to coming here today. So, so the next steps would be following decisions of this board, ongoing oversight regarding the implementation of the recommendations as set out, moving forwards in terms of setting up the new community group within Malden to keep a watching eye in terms of service delivery in Malden, but obviously alongside that, ongoing community and staff engagement. We will obviously be briefing those staff who are affected by these changes following this decision. And we will need to work together across the system to make sure that the benefits set out within this business case are delivered, both for local communities and patients, but obviously also taxpayers. So I will pause there, Mike, and hand back to you.
Thank you. So questions or comments from board members on what we've heard. As I said at the beginning, this is towards the end of a long journey. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. Can I add to what you say, which is to thank everyone who has been involved in this process. It's been a long one, and I think we've got quite a comprehensive report for us to look through, all of the evidence base there and what the community also said and felt. So just to add to that. And I want to come to this from a resident perspective, what does it mean now and going forward? I think one of the key things, when you have a difficult decision like this, how do we work together now and continue that process. And I think central to that is how can we trust each other again? That's really important because I think there's no doubt that some more difficult challenges remain ahead, and how are we going to be, what we've done now, how has that prepared us for that? So I just want to take one step back and perhaps I'll ask our ICB executive any reflection, any learning around, centering around the trust, and to what extent we can give our residents the confidence that we are committed to that, not just now, but also, the community committee that has been discussed about. So that's my first question. If I can just push one more, is because there's two sides to this as well. Think of the workforce as well. People who will be delivering this, because that's another potential area where there might be difficulty and challenges. So my question there is, to what extent are we kind of being prepared? Because some of the solutions we've arrived at will be fairly challenging to deliver. They're good solutions, but maybe challenging. So if you take some of the distributed sites, for example, are we going to make sure that we manage those, we deliver on those sites to meet, what quite rightly our residents expect? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Tom?
Yeah, sure. I might pick up the kind of the local community perspective, and then okay, got some reflections on kind of the engagement with the wider workforce in terms of those people who are currently delivering services. So I think we've learned a lot through this process, both in terms of kind of, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But reflecting back in terms of, there probably was an opportunity when we set out on this journey to be clearer in terms of, in the case of ambulatory care services within Malden, where would those locations potentially be? And if not, did we need to go away and do some further work and some further thinking before bringing forward some of those proposals? I think that the model that we have developed, it was the model in terms of we followed, an engagement and consultation process. We got lots of views. Based on those views, we took some time to dive into those in a bit more detail through the community consultation working group, and looked to, and it allowed us, I think, to get into a level of detail and debate with colleagues within the NHS and members of the community to really kind of get under the skin and understand some of the issues and challenges to make sure we got good recommendations and positive decisions which would maintain patient care, but equally also reflect the need for people, quite rightly, wanting to have accessible services. And obviously we're committing as part of this to move forward to the next stage in terms of making sure that there's ongoing community engagement and involvement in services. And I think that's something we're going to want to look at more broadly as we move forward in terms of the way that we work as an ICB and as an NHS, in terms of, as we're going to talk later about the 10-year plan, but clearly there's a lot in there about how we work with local communities to help them inform us the way that we deliver services in the future, so they better meet their needs and are responsive to their needs, as opposed to us doing what we think is the right thing to do. So I think that's important, and so I think there's lots to learn from this process that we can apply in the future. Okay, if you want to say a little bit about workforce.
Yeah, so we have a workforce subgroup as part of the governance surrounding this programme of work. So we have the Community Capacity Programme Board, and then there's a workforce subgroup of that with leads from all of the services affected and their HR leads. And they feed back to their staff through regular kind of staff communication engagement sessions. So that will continue through implementation. And I guess beyond that as well, there is regular touch points with staff. There will also be consultation with affected staff. So that's part of kind of statutory responsibility of the providers, is that any staff that are affected by these changes will be consulted with. So I think there are plans in place. I think we can also learn from some of the work that Tom's just talked about that we've done with the community in terms of how we can continue and better engage with staff throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments from board members? Yes, Matt?
Thanks so much for the consultation and the clarity here. I think it's helpful to have clarity from a clinical perspective for our staff and for our residents. I think it's probably just worth framing this discussion. Part of the privilege of my role is that I was out and about at the consultation, listening to residents, and some of you I see in the audience here as well, whether that was in Morden, the Dengies, or Witham. And there was a focus, and there was a passionate focus from staff as well. My questions would be are twofold. One is just to set the context from a clinical perspective. We know that the population is aging, but also the birth rate is dropping across the country as well. And we know that maternity care is becoming more complex as well with the change in demographics. We also see a seismic shift in how we manage and treat patients in both those areas. And particularly with the older frail generation, a lot more focus on out-of-hospital care and support. And so I welcome the focus here for developing a focus on ambulatory services in the next 5 years, which is key on top of our already delivered frailty services. So that's just to say these decisions aren't in isolation to the bigger population changes, as well as some of our big seismic service changes in the 10-year health plan just announced. I guess maybe a question directed to Matthew slightly is ambulatory services. The recommendation here is to stay together for the next 5 years. Clearly, we want to provide high quality services in the challenged estate. And so it's just a question, and we've heard it a bit alluded to, but are we assured that, in a sense, regular maintenance and the ability for clinicians to deliver the best care, because they are passionate there to deliver good care, will they have the facilities to do that even in the interim?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And if colleagues have had a chance to have a look in the appendices, there's a letter setting out our commitment from the board of MSCFT to Tom, setting out the commitment to ensure that the buildings at St Peter's, which I have visited, so I'm very familiar with some of the challenges that the staff and patients are facing. So we will make sure that those commitments are followed through. I think also just to make a comment about the staff, because I think Kate's talked to the kind of structure around staff engagement. I've met with the maternity staff there. We had a full and frank exchange about their perspectives. I've met with the midwifery staff that are now at the WJC as well to understand how they're settling in. Our commitment, whilst not described in the letter, is also to make sure as chief executives that our staff are briefed, involved, and have the opportunity to speak up if they feel their patients are not getting the quality of care as a consequence of either staffing levels or indeed equipment or indeed the buildings.
Thank you. Anna?
Thank you, Chair. My question is really about the future as we see it in Malden. So with the 10-year plan and the focus on the neighbourhood health service, how are these changes going to help facilitate the development of a neighbourhood health hub for Malden in the future?
Thank you, Tom.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, it's a good question, Anna. So I think now with the publication of the 10-year plan, I think there's a real opportunity to bring this work together with some of the ambition and commitment which is set out within the 10-year plan for health. And so clearly that plan that was published a couple of weeks ago is setting out the ambition for neighbourhoods across all of England to be able to access ambulatory diagnostic services, outpatient services, primary care services in a single place through a neighbourhood health centre. And actually, me and Jen were talking about this earlier. And Malden would clearly be a fantastic candidate for that, because actually we have a number of those services already being delivered in Malden, but we know that we have particular challenges around the estate, and it does definitely look like government is going to look at creating new routes and avenues towards being able to access capital funding. And so my plan and hope would be, obviously we're looking at a range of options at the moment, how we might create this new facility, but this might provide us with another opportunity for us to explore, and so actually we can, you know, do something really positive and potentially look at bringing together some of our general practitioners with these services, because we know that alongside some of the estate challenges at St Peter's, that our GPs are, you know, do not have enough space in Malden as well. So I think it's quite positive, and actually this is quite an exciting opportunity for us to put some of the work, some of the ambition in the 10-year plan into action in a local neighbourhood here in Mid and South Essex.
Thank you. I'm going to take Joe, and then I'm just warning board members I'm about to then get us to a decision-making mode, because it's a long meeting and I've got to try and make sure we run to time. So Joe, and then I can take one more question or comment if there is, and then I will need to get us on to the decision-making.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to equally thank everyone for their involvement so far, but I do think there's an opportunity now in the next 5 years as we consolidate as best we can from a kind of back foot approach, really, to try and get onto a front foot approach. And in that context, I would say from my own journeys around Greater Essex, there's probably some estate that's underutilised or that we could recycle and put into priorities like Malden in quite an innovative and intelligent way. And I would just urge us to really look as far and wide as we can for those opportunities and bring them into, as a colleague said earlier, into the light, and make sure we don't waste them. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
I'm sure everybody agrees with that. Getting on that front foot would be the right place to be. Well, thank you again, everybody, and Kate, and you and all people connected with you have been involved in the drafting, because the document is very clear. I'm thrilled to know that we are capable of making a decision today by ourselves, but that's because we have been checked en route by higher authorities.
Yes.
So that's good. So I'm now interested. Take the three things one by one. So there's option B for the stroke beds. Does anybody not wish to proceed with that option around the table? So we've agreed that then. Thank you very much. We then come to the relocation of maternity permanently to WJC. Again, is there anybody around the table who wishes to object to that? No, that's a decision then. And then finally, we are going to sustain the current list of ambulatory care services, which are listed on page 49 of the decision-making business case in detail, the complete list there. And we're going to sustain those for up to 5 years. And basically, this is while we do some thinking to work out how to get things in a better state, where it's clinically safe, desirable, and all those good things. And we're not permanently worried about water and things coming in and, you know, making things very, very difficult. So again, does anybody wish to disagree with that around the table? So if not, that is a decision, and we will be getting on to that work in due course. Just finally on this, we had two questions from members of the public relating to this. So I'll just deal with these now. I'll explain why in a moment. We will be writing to these two correspondents. Mrs. Caroline Donison asks for a list of the services, the ambulatory care services, basically. And as I've said, that is in the document here, a full list on page 49. And how will we access those? Well, the answer is just as you do now, until things are changed. And there must be a process for that. Stephanie Ireland asks about the development more generally of medical facilities. She mentions Westcombe Park, Cambridge, and others. And as Thomas said, that's work which is at this moment in time ongoing, where we're trying to get things sorted out. But we will reply to that so that there is a written response. So I'm going to pause now just for a couple of minutes. I'm conscious that there may be people who've come to join us from the public who were particularly or only interested in this decision-making business case item. So if you wanted to leave, because that's why you've come, you're most welcome to do so. I'll just have a couple of minutes pause for you to do so, and then we will just carry on with the meeting, because I am against time this afternoon. Okay, colleagues, thank you. I want to move on now to the next items of business. Thank you. We have some questions from the members of the public, not related to the decision-making business case. So first of all, Terry Brown has inquired about services at Thurrock Community Hospital now that the Community Diagnostic Centre is open. And I think, Tom, you're going to respond to that?
Yes, I can respond to that. So there was a number of detailed questions that Terry had asked around the services, and so we're preparing a full briefing for Terry that will be sent under separate cover after the board meeting.
Thank you. Peter Blackman has asked, referencing an independent academic report regarding access to healthcare services in Malden and the Dengie and South Witham ferries. And also, what will the MSc ICB do to enable appointments for healthcare services to be mutually convenient to clinicians, patients and carers, and be easily accessible by private vehicle or public transport? And I think, Dan, you're going to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Peter. What Peter doesn't reference in the question is that the independent academic research that you refer to was initiated through Peter's connection to Warwick University, so it demonstrates how communities can actively generate research. And on a personal note, thank you for allowing me to be involved in it. The ICB recognises and understands the importance of access to physical locations and healthcare services, as we've just seen. Access for patients, relatives and carers is an important aspect when considering equity of healthcare service provision. And access to services forms a significant part of a number of our impact assessments, which we consider when we're considering new services or indeed changes to existing services. Within the report, it notes that travel challenges could particularly impact those living in deprived areas. Patients on low incomes may be able to claim back travel costs for hospital appointments through the NHS Healthcare Travel Cost Scheme. The scheme helps ensure that the cost is not a barrier to accessing necessary care. And for those who are not eligible for patient transport, there are community transport options available. The answer just goes on to reference the 3 shifts within the NHS long-term plan around hospital to community, treatment to prevention, and analogue to digital. And as an ICB, we're obviously awaiting the further detail to support the implementation of that plan, but particularly in relation to neighbourhood health, again, in a very similar vein to what we've just heard. And the written answer will be given to Peter afterwards.
Thank you. Paul Osman has asked, referencing cancer waiting times in the performance report, and asked what additional actions this board is taking to rectify such poor cancer performance that will mean patients' cancer becoming worse while they wait for diagnosis and treatment. And I think, Sam, you're going to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for your question. The ICB recognises the seriousness and acknowledges the variation from national standards, particularly in the faster diagnostic standard and the 62-day treatment performance. We understand the risk associated with delays in diagnostics and treatment. Timely care is vital to improving outcomes, prevention, progression, and advanced cancer stages. Our system-wide approach addresses not only pathway performance, but also reinforces clinical harm reviews for patients facing long waits, ensures lessons are captured and safety concerns are also addressed. Whilst performance remains below national targets, key improvements have had some indication, with the 31-day treatment performance increasing from 79% with a 5.5% uplift in Q1. Backlog reductions through multidisciplinary team processes and revised governance oversight is continuing, and additional diagnostic capacity mobilising in radiology and pathology at our acute providers is also providing faster results. To support ongoing recovery, the ICB is pursuing continued oversight through Cancer Task Force and system recovery groups, and pathway redesign increased directed treatment models to reduce delay. We remain committed to improving faster diagnostics and 62-day treatment performance in conjunction with our acute colleagues, focusing on delivering meaningful change and protecting patient safety.
Thank you, and I think we'll return to this issue when we come on to the performance report later in the agenda. Paul Moorcraft asks, could you please confirm who will be running the Thurrock NHS Talking Therapist service from August the 1st onwards, and whether there is a plan in place to ensure continuity of care for both service users and staff? I think, Tom, you're taking this on behalf of Alex Meakin.
Yeah, I am. Thanks, Mike. So I think we can confirm that arrangements are being finalised to ensure the continued delivery of the Thurrock NHS Talking Therapy service from the 1st of August onwards. It's important to note that this is part of a wider procurement that's currently in standstill stage, and so we're unable to provide specific details which might prejudice any decision. Our priority within the ICB is to maintain continuity of care for also current service users, to make sure that they maintain their access to talking therapy provision with minimal disruption. Equally, we also want to make sure we provide stability for staff wherever that is possible. In the meantime, we'll continue to work with the current provider of the service and other stakeholders to ensure continued service delivery, and we'll communicate any changes when we can. Please be assured that continuity of care and staff wellbeing remain central to our planning and decision making around these services. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, and thank you to all of those raising those questions. So now we come on to the approval of the minutes of the previous Part 1 meeting on the 15th of May. I have a couple of minor changes I've been notified of. They are just minor changes in wording, but important. We were, for example, on one item talking about something that's a statutory function of the ICB. It's not a statutory function, but we are under legal requirement to respond to something. So it's just a slight change of wording for that. And there's a typo in another item. So 2 small changes there. Subject to those changes, are people happy to approve the minutes? And you'll remember silence is 110% support. Thank you very much. There's no matters arising other than things which are coming up later on the agenda. Has anyone got any other matters they wanted to raise? If not, thank you. On the action log, there are 2 outstanding actions. The EDI high impact actions, we've deferred that to the September board because this was going to be a busy meeting with the decision-making business case, and also an update on direct enhanced services, which we will provide at the September board. And then I think, so to speak, we'll be up to date with our actions. Okay, thank you. And talking of actions, so at I think our last meeting, the question was raised about our neurological services, and I think Helen, you are here to tell us and update us about what is going on in neurological services. Very good to have you with us.
Mike, if it's all right, I'll jump in first, if that's okay, and then
I just do what it says here, and it does say you're first. So sorry.
Okay, that's great. And again, thank you, Helen, for joining us today. Thank you to the Essex Neurology Network, who contacted the ICB, as Mike said, back in April, May time. We've responded to your questions within the paper outlined today. But just a few things for me to bring out before we hear from Helen. Firstly, we are very much aware of you. Thank you for highlighting that, in fact, 200,000 or so of our population will be infected by a long-term neurological condition. And as a clinician who runs a Parkinson's clinic, this is close to my heart as well. I also wanted to inform you that our neuronavigation team are very much contributing to the neuroscience strategies. We do have clinical leads across our system involved with some of the East of England work. And within our medium-term plan, there are senior responsible officers for our programs, and some of them do involve neurological conditions, for example, stroke. In fact, we've just had an hour's discussion on the business case, particularly around stroke rehabilitation for our population as well. So I hope you can see our commitment in that zone. And finally, I am the Senior Responsible Officer for Specialised Commissioning at the ICB, where very much neuro-rehabilitation is being discussed. And the workup of improvements in service will be coming through our joint committee in the future as well. That being said, what we try to do here at the board is bring to life the paper. We want to hear from clinicians who are delivering services to improve the health of our population. So I'm delighted to invite Helen, our very own Helen Garvey from the ICB, who's a clinician that works in the neuronavigation service. And Helen is going to tell us about a patient journey.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Garvey, and I'm the neuro rehab lead for the Pan Essex Neuronavigation Service that's hosted by Mid and South Essex ICB. So in the support of the paper, as Matt says, we wanted to share a patient journey, demonstrating the support that the ICB through the Neuronavigation Service gives to individuals with neurological conditions that require input from our service. So it's a small service. We cover the whole of Essex. So I'm the lead of the service. I'm a speech and language therapist by background, and my colleague Jack is a physiotherapist. And it's really key for us that within the team, we've got the clinical knowledge and expertise to be able to inform the pathways that we commission and make those commissioning decisions that need to be made for this complex group of patients. Now we've got the clicker. Hang on. So this is an outline of our typical pathway for someone who comes through our services, and it's across the whole of the system. So this was a 42-year-old man who was admitted to the major trauma centre. So the major trauma centres are a regional service. So this patient was in Addenbrooke's, but we also have links with the Royal London Hospital because of where we're located. We go through both of the networks. So he was admitted following a road traffic accident or collision, we're not allowed to say accident, in which he suffered multiple injuries, including a traumatic brain injury. So initially he had some time on the intensive care unit at Addenbrooke's and was then transferred onto the ward and then the rapid access to rehab ward, which is a 6-week pathway that's part of the major trauma commissioned pathway. And following which he had referrals made for the level 2B rehab, and I'll cover the levels of rehab shortly as well. And then at the end of the 6-week pathway, he was transferred into a level 2B rehab unit where he received daily input from occupational therapy, speech and language therapy and physiotherapy to work towards his own identified goals. And then part of that pathway is then he was referred to local authority colleagues for support with discharge. And just a little bit more about the process from us at each of these stages. So our service were informed about him on admission as someone who was likely to require specialist rehab, and that's either by the specialised commission services, which is known as level 1 rehab, which is the high intensity, high specialism that people can access either at the Coleman Centre in Norwich or also there's a number of London services that can be accessed, or the ICB commissioned level 2B rehab pathways, which is what we was identified for this individual. So once we knew about him, we have 2 weekly calls with the trauma coordinators at Addenbrooke's for updates on how he's doing, what's his level of need, what's the most appropriate pathway for him. And for us, it's really important that we identify that early, because what we hope is with time that things will improve, but if his needs continue to be high, we need to get him into the right place at the right time so that he's not waiting in the inappropriate settings once he's medically well. So we always, first of all, seek to establish whether our already commissioned services, which are typically our more local services closer to home, would be able to meet his needs. But because he was identified as having the level 2B rehab needs, that's what we needed to find for him. And it was so that we could maximise his independence and reduce his care needs at the point of discharge. So you can see here it says if he had not accessed rehabilitation, the plan, the recommendation from the clinical team would be that he would had to be discharged to a 24-hour care setting, at least for a short period of time, because there were concerns around his safety at home and the ability to manage even between care calls. So he was referred to that level 2B provider that we hold a block contract with, who felt they'd be able to meet his needs, and transferred at an appropriate time in his pathway. Then during that pathway, we continue to be involved. So at 4 weeks, there's a review meeting that was held to identify any potential barriers to discharge and ensure that the right agencies were involved in supporting him. So social care colleagues were involved at that stage. And then he was discharged home. So you can see there's a big change from that 24-hour care to a discharge home. I'm just going to cover in a little bit more detail that what his needs were at the point he was admitted to rehab and how these changed following an 8-week period of intensive rehabilitation. So the table summarises this, but you can see that he was requiring a really high level of support for moving around. He couldn't get out of bed, he wasn't able to walk, and he really needed to be able to walk home. Wasn't appropriate for a wheelchair. There were a couple of steps he needed to get in, so we would be talking about him living in a microenvironment at home without being able to get in and out if we didn't access the rehab. By the end of his 8 weeks, he was walking with a frame, short distances, and independent, going up the stairs with the rail and a stick. So that made a really significant difference to him. And then the other part of his needs that we needed to look at were from the brain injury, was around his cognition. And when we're talking about cognition, we're talking about his thinking, his planning, his reasoning skills, and the impact that these had on his communication. So initially he had quite limited insight into the fact that these things had been caused by his brain injury was causing him some frustration, some anger. He had psychology input as well in the rehab setting to help him to understand the impact of the brain injury. But it also meant that before he went into rehab, he needed support with planning everyday tasks. So things that you and I do every day without even thinking about it, making a cup of tea, having a shower, doing all of those things that he needed to be able to do as a 42-year-old man who was functioning well before this accident. So by the end of his rehab stay, there was improvement in all of these areas. It allowed him to be more independent or use the strategies taught in his rehab placement to be able to reduce the impact of these difficulties. We're not going to fix everything in 8 weeks, but his memory improved to the point he could use some external diary to manage remembering his appointments and things like that. So these changes in this sort of impairment level had a really positive impact on his function. And that brings us on to his own goals. So what did he want to be able to achieve? He wanted to be able to walk. He wanted to be able to have a conversation with his friends and family. These were goals set at when he was admitted into the rehab unit. To be able to return to work, to be able to just send a text message or an email that he'd found really difficult. So he was sending things that didn't make sense to his family and friends. He could use the phone, but it just didn't make any sense. And just to be able to return to living at home. So again, all things that we all do every day without thinking about it. He was initially reluctant to go to the rehab unit. So I've got a bit of a quote from him at the top there, because the level 2B units that we commission are out of area, and we get this quite a lot of people don't want to go. But by his review meeting, I always wonder whether the unit have paid people to say this. They're like, oh, it's brilliant here, I love it. He did really well there. So it's not ideal that he went out of area, but he was recognition of the fact that it was a short-term pain really for a long-term gain for him. He did have some ongoing needs. As I say, we don't fix everything in 8 weeks, but what we could do is transition him from the health-led services into other services within the community. So part of what we do is work really closely with our local authority colleagues. So the physical and sensory impairment teams from Essex County Council were involved with him because they are the specialist team with the expert knowledge of how to support someone with a brain injury. So you would look at his needs and think he doesn't need a package of care in a standard way. He can get up, he can get washed and dressed, but he had Care Act eligible needs around accessing the community, developing and maintaining personal relationships and accessing work. And we know from the research that people with brain injuries are the incidence of unemployment, relationship breakdowns, being involved in the criminal justice system are really high. So if we discharge without any of that support around them, the rehab becomes irrelevant really, because they don't get the support they need. So it was really important for us, and is really important for our service, that we work with local authority colleagues to manage that risk at the point of discharge. And they're much better at managing risk than we are in healthcare. They're much better at supporting that risk. And that's a really positive thing to see. And then finally, I just wanted to share some additional outcomes for the patient, but also for the service and our system. So with us being involved at an early point, we reduced the need for him to be repatriated into one of our local hospitals. And what's positive about that is if we move people lots of times who have cognitive impairment, we know that their outcomes will be worse because they're being moved around, they don't know where they are. Also, it means that we don't have to bring someone back into one of our acute beds that can be used for something else. So being involved at that early point really helps to manage the flow through it. And we linked in also with the discharge cell, which is now not called that anymore, the integrated transfer of care hub. So they will ask us, does this patient really need to come back? And I'll say, no, they've got a rehab bed in a day. So don't bring them back into our system. And also that, as I've talked about, the calls that we have with the physical and sensory impairment teams are invaluable for us in making sure that patients have something next. We also linked him into Sports for Confidence and Headway, so working with our community voluntary sector partners, because we can't keep them forever in the health system. We need to that's what the point of rehab is to get them back to having their independence. So that is all from me. I don't know if anyone's got any comments or questions.
Okay, just a couple of minutes. I mean, that's an incredible case study, and if you would kindly put those slides into circulation so that we can have them and keep them, that'd be marvellous. Thank you. But it's very impressive. Jeffrey and Joe, and then I must move us on just because, and Giles under the wire, and then I must move us on. Oh, really?
Thank you. I was wondering why you are pointing at me. Chair, thank you very much, and thank you, Matt and Helen as well. I think we have been asked to receive this report. Can I say how happy I am to receive it? And can I say that I want to share, if I can, very quickly. That's fantastic case study. But I got involved just early this week with a friend. When you say neurological condition, no one knows in the community what do you mean actually. But I think on Tuesday, a friend of mine called me, had a problem. We immediately suspected a stroke, for example, because there was something with the hand. So we ended up in A&E in Basildon. They were really good. I just want to share that. And then there was still a suspected case of maybe that's what a stroke. Just this morning, there was a TIA clinic. I didn't know what it means, but which took place this morning. And
transient ischemic attack.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just heard over lunchtime that they actually don't think it's a stroke, maybe some kind of nerve problem, that they will need to work through. I think I'm just sharing this because when I saw, the report, I couldn't believe it. This is really something we're experiencing and going through. And it just makes me wonder to what extent we know. We know some stuff about stroke, fast, you need to do this and that. I wonder what we know as a normal population for some of the other things, just a comment really. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Really informative report, Helen. Thank you so much. A couple of very quick fire questions, if I may. The report estimates that we've got 216,000 based on the national data. I just wondered how close we are to understanding, our real number, our actual number, and how we might track and monitor that, because it's clearly increasing. And I guess we need, for planning purposes, to understand as clearly as we can what the demand is. So that was and I'm happy to take all this offline, incidentally. And the second thing, because I'm a bit passionate about this really, is I'm always troubled by out of area. And I just wondered if you could give us context to that, because in my experience in mental health, it can be someone in Devon who's being looked after in Manchester. And that is not good if we could do something about that. So just some context on what out of area is. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the second one. The first one, I think, probably for me is not for me to answer, because this service is more around the rehabilitation model. So only a certain percentage of those 200 and however many thousand will come through our services. But in terms of the second one, out of area, the context of that is both of the level 2 units that we commission are in Cambridgeshire. So one's in St Neots, one's in Ely. We have previously used more local services, but they don't provide the intensity and the specialism of rehab that we need for that 8-week pathway, where we can get the outcomes that we need at a cost-effective way. So that's the decision about using the out-of-area placements. People love it, and even though they go miles away, they think it's great most of the time.
And Joe, just to add to that, I know we're up against time. Obviously, the ageing population is changing the demographics, and with that come new or increasing neurological conditions. And as Helen said, there's always because these are super specialist services with very targeted, focused, high-level rehab. Having them dedicated with specialist expertise obviously is costly, but also the right service model as well. So you have to balance locality versus clinical expertise in these services.
I get that. We should still bring it closer to home if we can.
and very much neurorehabilitation is one of our 7 or 8 priority areas of specialised commissioning, with a report coming back around improving access to neurorehab. So that very much is in the east of England ballpark at the moment.
Thank you, Giles, and then back to Matt for the last word.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is more a comment, and I take this in the context of me having worked in neurotrauma for over a decade, more at the sharp end, and having worked with Helen on a couple of cases. It's just a real congratulations to Helen and the team for the amazing work that they do in terms of the coordination of these pathways across health and social care. It really is an amazing example of partnership working. And most importantly, also as well, the emotional and the psychological impact of acquired brain injury cannot be underestimated. And the fact that we utilise a true multi-professional approach really does make long-term benefit, and we do see better outcomes. So my huge thanks to Helen and the team for the amazing work she does every single day.
Thank you.
I think Giles has summarised it nicely, nothing more for me to say.
Teamwork, okay. Again, thank you very much indeed. So we move on then to the MSc ICB annual report and accounts. Remember, we delegated getting this sorted out to the audit committee. The chair of the audit committee, unfortunately, is unwell, really quite poorly. And but I know he's very happy with the report. So are we happy to? I think we just need to formally approve that here. Everyone happy with that? Okay, good. Jeffrey, you were there and witnessed.
I bear witness to it.
Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed. So we come on to Chief Executive's report.
Thank you. I think I guess I've just tried to reflect in terms of some of the key developments since we last met. So the first one of those is we saw the publication of the 10-year plan we've already touched on the 3rd of July. Within my report, I've tried to provide a brief summary. Obviously, I know board members will probably be well through the 166 pages by now, but a summary of some of the kind of key commitments and ambitions as set out within the plan. I've also tried to reflect a little bit around what the implications of the 10-year plan are for the ICBs of the future in terms of building on the ICB model blueprint that we've seen previously. And so I think the plan very much reconfirms the ambition for ICBs to become strategic commissioners for their population, with an explicit expectation that action is taken to shift funding towards prevention and community care. Some other changes in terms of some of the architecture that has been in place around ICBs, such as commissioning support units, will be closed, with commissioning capability being strengthened locally, and also the implementation of new frameworks to assess ICB maturity and effectiveness. And slightly later in my report, I reflect on the new national outcomes framework, which I think is sort of an indication of the direction we're going in. It also sets out some changes in terms of the governance and structure changes of the ICBs, including the future shape of ICB boards. We're waiting for some further guidance in terms of timescales around that, and equally also in terms of the new responsibilities around kind of accountabilities for delivery within the new system and some of the new mechanisms that will be put in place. So such as the new provider models that are set out, so multi-neighbourhood providers, the new neighbourhood contract, and also the implementation of new outcome-based approaches to commissioning. Lots to go at over the course of the next 10 years, I guess. The plan is for us to have a seminar session, I think in August. We're just confirming if we can be there to have a bit more of a detailed conversation about the 10-year plan, what it means for us and how we want to take that forwards. Secondly, the board's aware that we are now kind of well into the process in terms of the ICB change programme itself, and so we've had confirmation that there's been ministerial approval of the proposed 3 new ICBs in the East of England, so Greater Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk, and Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, Luton, Milton Keynes and Hertfordshire, and the aim is for those new organisations to come into existence on the 1st of April. At the time of writing, the processes for chairs and chief executive appointments were running. They're now in the final stages of approval up the line, and so once we've got ministerial sign-off for those appointments, we will obviously confirm that to partners across the system. And then finally, we also have started a process around executive team members, which is now ongoing. We are working through the timetables for the other elements of organisational change over the course of this year. The National Oversight Framework is set out. I've provided a summary of that. Interestingly, I think one of the things that I did have tried to draw out within the plan is that although ICBs will not be segmented through the oversight framework for this year, there is a significant change actually in the way and the measures against which ICBs will be assessed against. So me and Sam are doing a piece of work about how we realign our reporting to reflect these areas, because although some of these we will all recognise and know about, some of them actually I think that are things that we don't currently routinely look at, and so we will need to get into that new discipline. And then finally within the report, I've just kind of set out some kind of things that we've been able to celebrate across our system since we last met. So some fantastic work that's been done across the organisation and with our partners over the last couple of months or so. I'll leave it there, Mike, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments on Tom's report? Joe?
Thank you, Chair. I understand block contracts, I think, and understand payment by results, I think, but year of care tariffs was a new one on me. I don't understand it. I just wonder if somebody could enlighten me what that new terminology means. And secondly, do the 2% annual productivity gain and the 50% reduction in corporate structure, are they incremental to one another or do they overlap in any way? Thanks.
Joe, there was an entire line across this table. We're looking to see if there was somebody who know, and it turns out it's Jim.
Sorry.
It's fine, Joe. I think so. We are still waiting for more information on what the year of care tariff could mean. I think it's going to try and take its roots from things that we know already, like the maternity pathway. So where you have an episode of care that has a start and an end, and actually the money can follow the patient around in that respect. So you could start your care in one place, be transferred, and actually the money will flow. So we're still waiting to understand. They are being used in some parts of the country, but we haven't got any in our patch at the moment in terms of year of care tariffs. When we know more, I think it will be quite helpful if Sam and I work together in terms of what that means for how we're reporting performance and activity and finance through the F&P as well, because there's a whole move back to kind of best in class, best case tariffs, all of those kind of things as well. So still lots to work through at the moment. The focus is, like I say, on the blocks, on picking the blocks, and the huge national agenda around making sure we know what we're paying for before we start changing how we're paying for it. I think at the moment. Hope you did.
And the 2% efficiency versus the 50%, and I think they're directly related. So the 50% reduction on ICBs is a pure cut, running cost reduction, so cash out in terms of then. Obviously, I think the 2% efficiency will be built into, as it historically is, the way the funding's allocated to ICBs and obviously through tariffs and other contractual arrangements. And so I think it's a planning assumption that we'll need to bear in mind as we move into kind of a refresh of medium-term planning on a greater Essex footprint going into the new financial year.
Thank you. Rob and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And Tom, thanks. It's really interesting. It's a little bit like an onion, isn't it? Every time you see kind of another paper around the edge span, there's another layer. It becomes a little bit clearer, actually. There's lots of layers. I suppose the question I'm really interested in, obviously, there's lots of really productive stuff for potentially work across health, social care, poultry sector in delivering this. I think it's potentially really exciting. So if I was looking from the outside as a member of the community, the bit I'd probably be asking if I'm a Thurrock resident is that one about neighbourhood health centres in every community 6 days a week. Does the government giving any kind of clarity as to what they think a community looks like at the moment or not?
No. So, well, a little bit actually. I'm only going to So if you look at neighbourhood is the sort of the new terminology. And so what's being described, so if you take the two contracts, so the neighbourhood contract and the multi-neighbourhood contract, so the neighbourhood contract is being described as being for about a population of around 50,000. And with, I think, a general expectation that we would look to align PCNs and integrated neighbourhood teams to those neighbourhoods. Now, I think we need to probably do a piece of work of processing what are our neighbourhoods, and what alignment do we have currently in terms of the footprints of local service provision to those neighbourhoods. And so I think that's something we're going to need to pick up and work across Essex to agree and develop. And then the multi-neighbourhoods are talking of kind of populations of north of 250,000. So probably what we would have described as alliances or place potentially would be something along those lines. The way I could conceivably see it work, say within a greater Essex context, is that you divide the population of Greater Essex by about 50,000, you end up in somewhere around about 40 neighbourhoods. And you then look at our places potentially being ultimately province of our new unitary authorities once those boundaries have been agreed. So I think we've got a bit of work we need to do over the next kind of period of time to actually, I think agreeing neighbourhoods is actually the more important thing we need to do at this time whilst we wait for the LGR work to work its way through, because we can assemble those neighbourhoods up into place in due course, can't we? So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, this one kind of one of the best summary I've seen in terms of capturing everything. So thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions, I think. And I know all of them still developing. I think the first thing is maybe just to pick on what Robert just said around the neighbourhoods. And the BCS, for example, they've been working at the neighborhood level all this time, and then to some extent, the NHS and others are joining them in that neighborhood, if you like. So what's the thinking there, and what's the commitment there? That's the first question. But linked to that also, what is this telling us so far as we know about the wider role of the BCS? And I'm thinking around the assembly and the alliance, and it may well be we're not there yet. So that's kind of the first set of things. The second thing I've got is on the ICB focus on prevention and community care and supporting that, which is kind of something many of us have been waiting for. So to see it there, should we get excited is the question, or is it all still, because that would be really good if we could get that to be realized. And my final point, Tom, is on inequalities, because there was a bit of concern whether we would have the kind of laser focus on inequalities like we did at the ICB stage. And there's going to be some reporting on inequalities. And I wonder to what extent it kind of drills down into demographics or just a very high level. Or again, maybe we don't know at this point. Thank you.